3 counties, 24 cities, working together, accomplishing more than any of us could alone. Whether your roots run generations deep, or you recently moved to Greater Portland, you are a part of Metro, the nation's only regional government elected by the people. Planning for the future, preserving what we love. Let's keep our region thriving for decades to come.
I'm Laura Lepley, a Metro Park Ranger. Here at Oxbow Park, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Welcome Center and you're at the Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Oxbow Park.
Okay, we'll declare a quorum and call the Metro Council work session to order. I will now ask our clerk, Georgia Langer, to call the roll for attendance.
Yes. Councilor Nolan.
Good morning. Here.
Good morning. Councilor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councilor Lewis.
Present.
Councilor Simpson is here. Councilor Gonzalez will be here shortly, and Acting Council President Wong.
Present. Thank you. Okay, we have 2 presentations today. We'll start with the Future 50 2040 Growth Concept Look Back. Our first topic today is related to future vision, but one we haven't discussed yet as council. As we all know, our work to update our future vision is guided by Metro's charter. That work is exciting and forward-looking, but today is our first chance to take a look back on the 2040 growth concept and consider our successes, our challenges, and how we can make the Future 50 even better. We have the Future Visions team back with us today, Millie Wilkinson, Deputy Director of Planning, Development, and Research, and Ted Reed, Principal Regional Planner.
Good morning, Acting Council President Wong, members of the Metro Council. We're really excited to be here today to share information with you that looks back at what our region envisioned 30 years ago and how we've performed so far. We also shared this presentation with the Future Vision Commission, and we're excited to start to have the opportunity to share it with you today. Next slide, please. So as you know, we're in the middle of updating our region's 50-year future vision, which is required in our charter. When the last future vision was developed, long-range land use and transportation planning were among Metro's 4 set of limited responsibilities. The future vision was referenced as a beginning point for policies in the regional framework plan, and that connection is required in Metro's charter. The regional framework plan describes and includes a 2040 growth concept. The impacts of the 2040 growth concept are the most tangible way that the past future vision influenced our region. So we're looking back at those impacts as we look forward to update our future vision. Once that future vision is adopted, sometime around the time we're in right now, next year in 2027, one of Metro's implementation actions will be to update the growth concept. And I'm assuming we won't call it a 2040 growth concept anymore. It will have a different name. It's been 3 decades since we had a future vision. We developed our framework plan and we put in place the land use picture of what we were hoping our region would look like. So it's really time to make sure that our policies are guiding us towards an updated vision that you all will be talking about next year. A common understanding of our current policy framework and how it's helped us achieve or not achieve the goals that we set out will help us work together to figure out what we need to tweak and change moving forward. We're also mindful that land use policy is only one tool in our toolbox as Metro to help us get to a 50-year vision. And there will be other implementation actions that you all will be talking about over the next year. So today we're going to talk about several topics, and we're looking forward to continuing this conversation over the course of the next several months as the region and our state consider updating the land use policies that shape this place that we all love. In a minute, I'll turn it over to Ted, and who will cover a few different topics. He'll talk about what the 2040 growth concept is, and then go into some details about how the region has performed. We've pulled together existing data from a number of different places to tell a more complete story about how our region has developed over the last 30 years. So some of the topics that we're going to cover are growth management, housing, transportation, climate change, economy, farmland, parks and nature, and equity folded into those other topics. We have a lot of information for you, and we're looking forward to your thoughts on what might be missing as you're listening. So we have 3 questions on the slide right now that we'd like you to be thinking about so we can have a conversation about them at the end. What are your reactions as you hear about this data? Does anything surprise you? And then what are some of the places around the region that come to mind when you think of success over the last 30 years? Those are some of the areas that we'd like you to keep thinking about as we go through a lot of information. So with that, and I realize I didn't introduce myself. I'm Malou Wilkinson. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning, Development, and Research, and I use she, her pronouns. Turn it over to you, Ted.
Thank you, Malou. Thank you, Acting Council President Wong, councilors. I'm Ted Reed, Principal Regional Planner at Metro. And as Malou mentioned, we're going to take you on a bit of a whirlwind tour of land use, transportation, climate change, equity, a number of different topics. We're just scratching the surface here. We realize that, but it's to give you a broad overview of what's happened in the region over the last 30 years or so, and so you can begin thinking about what we might do differently. If we could advance to, going forward a couple slides, we want to talk about what the growth concept is. And to do that, first, we want to look back at where housing development has happened over the last century, because this sort of focus on where growth happens is very much the focus of the growth concept. And so this video, it will replay in a moment, but it starts in 1900. And you can see some of the patterns that are probably familiar to you, where the growth in the early 19th century, or rather 20th century, begins in central Portland. And then over time, particularly after World War II, you see outward growth happening. Continues into the 70s. You see a little bit of a slowdown in the 80s with the recession that our state and region had in the 80s. Picking up again in the 90s, you see a lot of growth happening, particularly in Washington County with the tech sector really taking off. And then something interesting begins to happen in the 2000s, where a lot of the plans that we're going to talk about begin to take effect, and really see this refocus of development in our urban centers, so the central city as well as urban centers around the region. And so the reasons that these patterns happen are not an accident. Many of the policies that your predecessors put in place shaped these outcomes, though there are other factors at work too. The private market decisions made by private market philanthropic sector, how this gets implemented at a local level, all those things affect where development happens. So if we could move to the next slide.
It's also mesmerizing to just watch.
Yeah, where can I just watch that? Is that online?
We can provide it
We'll
too.
provide it.
Yeah. So this growth concept, the map you see is the 2040 growth concept as it's depicted today. It's been amended a number of times over the years. It was first adopted in 1995, and it was very much focused on where growth should happen. So I mentioned in the 90s, there was a lot of population growth happening with the tech sector really taking off in our region. And there was a lot of concern that if our region didn't pay attention to planning for this growth, didn't take an intentional approach, that we'd have some unintended consequences of loss of farmland, loss of habitat, that people would be stuck in traffic longer trying to get to and from where they needed to go. So this growth concept identified a number of urban centers and corridors around the region. You see those depicted in pink. It was unique at the time for thinking not just about land use and transportation in silos, but thinking about them together and how they interact. And so the idea here was that most growth would happen in these urban centers in the existing urban growth boundary. They would be well connected by multiple modes of transportation. The nature would be interspersed throughout the urban area. It wasn't something to be seen somewhere else, that it was part of our daily lives. And that over time, there would be well-considered expansions of the urban growth boundary on the edge of the region as needed. So if we can move forward a slide, I want to talk a little bit about how this growth concept gets implemented. I mentioned at the outset that regional policies are part of what we do to implement the plan. So big decisions that this council makes, like the regional transportation plan, urban growth management decisions, but also there are a number of programs that Metro has taken on over the years, as we've learned from experience about what works and what doesn't, that are focused more on partnerships and funding. So things like our placemaking grants that are focused not so much on physical locations, but more about the community. That's sort of been an evolution of how we do our work. And I'll mention to our 2040 planning and development grants, as well as our transit-oriented development program, parks and nature bonds that the voters have passed several times over the years. And then more recently, our agencies work on affordable housing and supportive housing services. We also rely on our partners at the local level. So cities and counties adopt plans and zoning codes that really implement that 2040 growth concept to encourage that compact growth in urban centers. So it's a complex picture about how all this gets implemented, and we're going to present some data on the outcomes today. Some of it is positive and some of it's negative. Some of it is neutral. But as you think about these outcomes, it's helpful to think about what may have caused them. Some of them are in our region's control, and others are sort of products of a bigger picture, things happening on that national and global scale. And so to be able to do things better in the future, we need to correctly diagnose why things have been happening. So if we can move forward to the next slide. Growth management has long been one of Metro's core responsibilities. This is part of the way that the Metro Council implements the 2040 growth concept by carefully managing the region's urban growth boundary. So when we look back at where growth has happened, if we can move forward a slide, this map shows essentially the intensity of development from 2009 to 2023. So looking back a decade plus at where housing development has happened. And so you see the higher peaks, more purple colors, those are areas that have had more intensity of development. And what this indicates to me, at least, is that the growth concept is working in as much as growth is happening where it was intended. You see the big peak in central Portland, that was of course part of the growth concept, but also that notion of having multiple centers and corridors around the region where growth would happen is happening here. So we see a Renko Town Center, for instance, out in Hillsborough popping up with its transit-oriented development. And we also see areas that are closer to the edge, like Happy Valley, that have seen a lot of growth, as well as North Bethany. About 60% of the new housing developed in the last decade has been through redevelopment and infill. And so that is the main way that we build housing in our region, is through redevelopment and infill rather than on vacant land. If we can move forward a slide, please. Part of the story here is not just about where growth has occurred, but how people experience that. We actually have seen a decline in geographic segregation over the years. So this is looking back at areas that had 80% or greater population that was white. And you see a decline over the years. So in particular, our suburbs have become more diverse. It's part of the story here.
Mr. Chair, just a clarification. When you described that predominantly white community, you said 80%.
Yes.
And how big are the units?
I was anticipating this question, Councilor, and I wasn't able to find an answer this morning, but I will get back to you on that. It's a good question. It's using census data, so presumably some census geography.
If it's as small as a census tract, that's amazing, but I doubt it.
I doubt it, yeah. If we can move forward, please. So I mentioned the urban growth boundary is one of the core ways that that you all implement the growth concept. In the development of the 2040 growth concept in the mid-90s, there was a lot of discussion about the role of the urban growth boundary, how much it might be expanded over the years. The concept that got adopted in 1995, imagine that we would have up to 252,000 acres in the urban growth boundary by the year 2040. And if we can click forward, we've actually surpassed that acreage at this point. So we are now at 262,000 acres in the urban growth boundary, 15 years or so short of 2040. So we've expanded more than anticipated by about 10,000 acres. Next slide, please. What we've learned, however, is that urban growth boundary expansions are not the end of the story in terms of producing housing and jobs. I think there's long been a notion that if you just expand the boundary, then you'll get more housing, more jobs. But it's proven to be quite a bit more challenging than that. Most of these expansions happened from 1998 onwards. There have been about 35,000 acres added to the boundary since it was first adopted in 1979, and the vast bulk of that was 1998 onward. Of those areas added 1998 onwards, just 12% of the planned housing in those expansion areas has actually been built to date. We often, when we talk about this, get the question about, well, what about if you excluded Damascus? That was a big part of those expansions in 2002, several thousand acres. If we take that out of the picture, 17% of the planned housing has been built in these expansion areas. So some very real challenges aside from providing land. It's providing infrastructure, governance, assembling the land with property owners that may have different interests, as well as local opposition to growth and change. That's a very real factor. Next slide, please. So moving on to housing a bit more, if we can click forward, tying into this growth management theme, part of what we keep our eye on is out of the larger 7-county metropolitan area, how much of that growth are we accommodating in our metro urban growth boundary? So the 7-county, of course, extends north of the river into Washington State, Clark County, as well as Columbia County in Oregon. So larger geographic area. And the story here is that we've been increasing the amount of residential growth that we've been accommodating or capturing is what we just use to describe it in our urban growth boundary. This is important because generally speaking, we want to make sure that if people want to live in our urban area, that they're able to do so, that we're not displacing growth to neighboring cities. To some extent, that's going to happen because people are going to make choices to live in neighboring cities regardless of the options here. But we want to see generally that we're not displacing growth. And so you see this upward trend in this capture rate of our urban growth boundary. Next slide, please. Yes.
Yeah, the last bar on the bar chart cut off in 22, so it's a weird 12-year decade. Instead of the previous ones that were actual decades. Can you explain what data you
Yes,
used?
so Malou mentioned that we used existing data to put this together. So that was pulled from the 2024 Urban Growth Report. And as you noted, it does cut off a little bit earlier than our current day. So it was that's the explanation. Yeah.
But why wouldn't we have done 10 to 20?
I
Like
think it
the
was.
other bars were 10 years each.
I think it was intended to give the most current information possible for that growth management decision. So trying to creep as closely to 2024 as we could.
Okay,
But
and
we
we've
could-
always measured those in decades. I mean, I guess what I'm suspecting is that in the early mid 2010s, we were absolutely winning. And I'm curious if we've
Yeah.
fallen since 22, or even if like 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 were less than say 2013, 2014.
I suspect there's some truth to that, Councilor, that and you all have seen the news about growth happening in Clark County in particular. So we can look into that further.
Like, I appreciate the boost, but I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
take the win.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Clarifying on the same topic. If you're looking further into it, I think it would be helpful if you could aggregate the 7-county investment in a few key infrastructures, like local transportation. Because you can't build housing out at the fringe or further if you're not providing transportation infrastructure, water, sewer, and so does the investment there facilitate that? I mean, there's a certain chicken and egg question, but knowing what that investment has been might inform our understanding.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I have a question too, but I'm not sure if you want to answer Councilor Knowles first.
Councilor Nolan, I think we'll have to look into that question a bit more to provide an answer.
We know from your purple peaks that Central Portland already has the infrastructure, by and large, able to support growth. You don't have to build bigger sewers or water lines because they were pre-built to the zoned density. But in some of the outlying areas, the suburban areas, in order to accommodate the same level of housing, you have to build new streets, new sewers, new water lines.
That's certainly true. And that's been one of the main themes behind those challenges of
Right.
developing housing and jobs in the expansion areas is that infrastructure cost.
I guess as I hear that, and I mean, I support both how we do infill and inside the UGB, but as we think about smart growth, the building of those roads, those utilities, that's workforce. That is opportunity for individuals to build up our region as we grow and expand. And I haven't heard us really put that into a real frame or perspective, because I think the Portland that we benefit from, it took many hands to build. Sidewalks just don't appear, crosswalks don't appear, roads don't appear. It takes people to do that. And so I'd be curious to hear like the workforce slant around how we build out in a smart way these communities in a tangible way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I want to make sure that's an important question. I mean, I've seen this presentation a few times now in the last few weeks. I love it. I think it's really important for all of us to continue to be led with data and with the evidence of the regional system. One of the things that I'm left yearning for as we go through some of these slides that say the 12% of our expansion lands have been developed, which I fully believe is obviously true. I then start to think about the more of an accountability piece. I mean, we've been in a housing emergency for almost 2 decades at this point. And when I see 12%, it also means 88% of the land that we've added has been vacant or is not moving. And right now, that 88% is this amorphous blob from what we're talking about of other parts of the region that aren't, frankly, doing their part. And I think it is Metro's job to beat the drum of we need to do our part. We need to deliver the housing people need. And so I think maybe in a future presentation, I would like to know what parts of the region is this? I mean, but is it maybe by metro district? I mean, I would like to really get neighborhood by neighborhood, understand where the deficiencies of our plans are, because people need housing. And I think we're really well positioned to say we're defining the problem, we have the tools, and then here are the gaps. And we need to fix every single gap to deliver that, right? So, yeah, and I just think that, I mean, I know insofar as my metro district, and I don't have the specific data that you might have, but I think that for the majority of the expansions that have happened there, I mean, almost all of them have gone through their full planning and are delivering housing and or small annexations at this point. And so I think about like, not every acre in the region is created equal in terms of jurisdictions and all those different variables. So I think that is part of the system and the design that we've created. And I think we need to acknowledge that as well. So I just want to get way more granular and more specific and think about what are the steps that we can actually take to deliver the housing that people need. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I want that information. Thank you, Ted.
Could I add to that? I think a crucial piece of this is also neighborhood sentiment, and we need to make sure that we capture any of that, right? Like people want to see us improve and build out housing, but also we have limited space to do so, and so like making sure we capture the local sentiment in those neighborhoods and the approaches and the engagement that has happened and the pushback from that, I think is part of this process too, particularly on those 88%.
Yeah.
And while you're keeping track of things to consider in your next data, simplifying it, there are 2 ways to not meet your target for housing produced. One is if you're only producing 12% of your target, you're only developing 12% of the land. Another way is you're developing all of the land, but only at 12% of the density that you had anticipated. And so when we get granular, I think we need to understand that as well. Are we annexing, are we adding to the urban growth boundary? And for whatever reasons, cost of infrastructure, whatever, local sentiment, not producing the housing that was projected at the time of annexation.
Yeah. I mean, I was just at the last weekend in one of the brand new expansion areas on the edge of the region, Cornelius, the Laurel Words neighborhood. I mean, these are mostly single family and middle housing homes. And I'm always astonished at the amount of density that is literally on the edge of the region. That is frankly more dense than most established neighborhoods in our major cities that are closer to the urban core. And so I think there's like it's a yes and anyway, I think we should keep going with the presentation because there's important info here. But great discussion.
I think it's really exciting, counselors, that you're engaging like this, and and keep doing it. But I'll remind you that we're looking back right now at what has happened, and what you're giving us is some really great beginnings of where you want to go moving forward. So just reminding you that we're looking at what's happened, and the the way that I'm appreciating the additional information that you're looking for that we can try and bring back to you as we continue to set ourselves up for the future.
Yes, it's gratifying to hear the interest. Thinking about the kinds of housing that have been built, the growth concept really, in order to achieve that kind of compact growth that it called for, we needed to see a shift in the types of housing that were going to be built. Single family housing, detached housing tends to take up more space and more land than middle housing, multi-unit housing. And so on the ground today, if we look at what the housing mix looks like, half of it is single unit detached housing, followed up by multi-unit housing at just over a third, and then followed by middle housing. Other housing is senior housing, houseboats, manufactured housing, things like that. And so
Is this the housing stock of the region today?
that's the housing stock of the region today. And so if we can click forward,
The stock today or what's being built?
this is all housing today in 2024. That's the mix, 50% single unit detached. And so if we look at what was built from the adoption of 2040 growth concept until 2024, so 1996, 2024, we see the shift where the plan worked, that we made that shift towards multi-unit, so apartments and condos. That made up 47% of the new housing built during that time frame. Middle housing is beginning to show up as a real option for people. Again, providing more choices was the notion, so that people could match their household situations, their budget situations to more options.
So if I understand this slide correctly, on the left, it's like, let's say the housing over the last 150 years, the composition in the region is that, or whatever period. But since in the last 30 years, that's our smart growth strategy in action. 2/3 of the housing has been, I guess what you would say, like non-traditional white picket fence housing, which is great, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's again, we have changing demographics, and so to match people's needs, there's been a shift, but it's also been an intentional strategy to use more efficiently what we have, or the land that we have, as well as the infrastructure that we have today. So if we can click forward. But it hasn't been enough housing. You all know this story. There's been chronic underproduction of housing, and I apologize that you can't read this, so I'll tell you what it shows. Ever since the Great Recession, the housing bubble, 2008, nationwide, we've really had a housing underproduction challenge. In 2024, our region ranked 19th in the country for underproduction. So this is not a good thing. This is telling us that we are in good company of not producing enough housing. There are many reasons that this has been happening. We have high lending costs for construction, high construction costs, labor shortages, to Councilor Simpson's point, the sort of workforce, skilled workforce to get things built. We have had restrictive zoning in some locations that has tamped down housing production, infrastructure costs. But it is also helpful to keep in mind that this is a national phenomenon. And so the challenge is real here, and it is not unique here. But when we don't have enough housing being built, if we can click forward, this shows up as cost burdens for people. In particular, renter households feel this burden the most. You'll see that essentially in this bar chart, the longer lines are groups that have more severe cost burden. So in particular, smaller households, households with that have a disability, live alone or younger, older, or BIPOC, are going to have higher cost burdens. So I'll take, for example, Black households, about 2/3 of the renter households there are experiencing cost burden or severe cost burden. And so this is something for us to keep our eyes on going forward, not only building enough housing, but making sure that we're building it in the price ranges that can be afforded.
That's good. Sorry. Real quick, I hear you on race and ethnicity. Like, that's a big one. The one I'm looking at though is age, because I think that tells a big story, because like if you look at 25 to 64, that's people with jobs who are like working. 18 to 24, you fresh out of high school, you haven't really built the skill yet, and 65 plus, you're on a fixed income. So for me, we talking affordability in a major way, and we should single that piece out right there.
Okay.
On the last, I'm sorry.
No, please, Andrew, go ahead.
I just want to point out on the last slide, you said it's a national phenomenon, which it is, but it's not consistent nationally. And I think that might be worth looking at as well.
Sure.
That you can actually see areas of the country that have built enough housing and areas that have not.
That is true. There's variation. And if you could read it, you would see that there's there are some metro areas that are known for lots of housing production. So the Sun Belt, for instance. So you'll see Atlanta, Phoenix, other cities like that showing up as having underproduction as well. So this is a national phenomenon. Not to excuse ourselves, we clearly have a problem here as well. But if we're going to diagnose things, we need to keep in mind that national context.
I'm also curious though. Real sorry. If you
Can I just
overlay,
make a point real quick on this before we get into this, I'm sorry. I think the point I want to make though is yes, nationally, but again, the inconsistency is important, because if we're thinking about how we think about the next 20 or 30 years, looking at areas that have built, there are lessons to be learned there, right? And the New York Times did a really fantastic thing on Sunday, just a couple of days ago, sort of noting those differences in terms of housing production and how that's directly impacted the affordability you have on the slide. So I just don't want to I want to make sure we're not saying it's a national problem that everyone's facing. It's a problem that hits lots of jurisdictions, but there are lots of jurisdictions that have done things to solve it. So there are solutions out there.
And thank you. The New York Times article you mentioned also mentioned Oregon as a leader in revising zoning codes to allow more housing mix. So I think there's a mixed picture here. We also, the things that have happened in very recent years, pandemic onward, are really influencing how we're thinking about this. Our region suffered great reputational damage in the last several years, and that's playing into willingness to build here. And so everything you said is very real. And yes, we have some challenges here.
Yeah,
No. You hit exactly my point on affordability. I also wanted to add on to that. It's just like, I'm looking as I continue, and I'm doing my own little breakdown in my head. I'm just like, folks with disabilities, one person household size, obviously race and ethnicity, but like those last two bars, below 30% AMI, like how much of our current population is inlaid in there, like of all of those intersectionalities? Because I think, again, we're talking about the most burdened within our community, but also, again, how we can start to address the affordability issues that COO or Deputy COO Scott brought up as well through that Times article. I mean, we can break this chart down a million different ways, but for me, it's the cost burden on those individuals in our community and the impacts it's having on how they can live here, because people are making serious choices about, can they afford to stay here because of that? So.
yeah. Is this a new slide from previous?
This is from the Regional Housing Coordination Strategy in 2025. So this may look familiar to you.
Yeah, but did we put this in the Future 50 presentation to folks?
I don't recall if we did or not.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm glad that we added this, because I remember in that group, and that's recently we talked about wanting to look at cost burden and also just the relation. So I appreciate you. I wanted to say thank you for bringing it back into this presentation.
Good.
And I mean, just to put a pin on what Andrew and Councilor Simpson mentioned, I think absolutely policy has consequences, obviously, right? Like there's always winners and losers with policy, and I want us to tackle this with great urgency in a way that continues to align with our values, that builds on decades of successful planning, and also recognizing that there is a severe mismatch as well. And this is all of us. I mean, it's the legislature, it's the governor, it's our cities, it's all of us. But I guess I'm just tired of feeling like we're in a housing crisis and maybe next year we'll do better, right? You know what I mean? So I'm feeling this fire.
Yep. Your constituents are feeling this, and you know that, so I appreciate that. If we can move on. Yeah.
Councilor Rosenthal had.
Quick question, over the last, I mean, you can go several decades back, over the last, and 50% of the housing market approximately has been single family housing, and the sizes of single family housing has progressively increased. In other words, we're building 2,000, 2,500 square foot housing when we used to build 1,200 square foot housing. Is that same trend true of apartments and multifamily housing? In other words, is the size of the units that people are building or wanting to live in, is that a significant factor?
Councilor Rosenthal, it's a good question. You're correct about the trend with the sizes of single family homes. I don't know offhand with apartments and condos if a similar thing has happened.
Okay, I'm just curious. Yeah. Thanks.
And to bring it back to Malou's point that we first need to understand what has happened and what natural causes or policy causes have resulted in those outcomes before we can start talking about which of those do we want to use to move forward to incentivize or create housing. Along with the size of housing, there's not a one-to-one relationship, but there is some relationship with the cost of housing. And so as we analyze affordability of housing, somehow we have to take that and financing costs into consideration. Because when I bought my first house, the rule of thumb was that the bank would give you a mortgage for twice your household income. That's now expanded.
It's like 5
And people are taking on more and more debt. So that's a factor. But also people's preferences have changed. Most of that housing that's in the 50% that's single family as of today's existing housing is in Portland. And it is 900, 1,200, 1,500 square feet, where 1,500 square feet was a fairly good sized house when it was being built post World War II. And 1,500 square feet in a single family home now is a one person house. And how, I mean, we have to take that into account because if people are wanting bigger and more interior space as well as more exterior space, then have they made the choice to voluntarily wish to invest a higher percentage of their income into their housing, as opposed to the housing that their parents had?
All good questions. I'm going to ask Ted to move on because there's still quite a bit left so that we can
tell us to shut up.
Yeah.
All are interested. That's good. So moving on to transportation. I mentioned earlier that the 2040 growth concept was a bit ahead of its time in thinking about transportation and land use together, that how they interact, that if you build certain kinds of transportation facilities, you're going to get a certain kind of development, and vice versa. If you build more compact housing, that you can then facilitate greater access to transit and other modes of transportation. So looking at how this is played out in terms of the vehicle miles traveled per capita in our region compared to Oregon and the US, on average today, the average person in our region travels 17 miles a day, which is considerably lower than most Americans. And so that's, again, this connection between land use and transportation, keeping destinations closer by. This has real impacts for affordability and safety. if we can move forward a slide. And I'll just mention that, you know, picking up on that theme of affordability and how we'll compare with other regions. Transportation is the second biggest household cost after housing. And so when we look at those two things combined, according to the Center for Neighborhood Technology, our region is doing better in terms of affordability of those combined costs than many of the regions that we hear about as having figured out housing production. So for instance, lower cost burdens than Atlanta, Phoenix, Houston, and Dallas, according to that metric, if we look at housing and transportation together. And
can I ask a quick question on this map? Is that BMT per capita as an average for this region, or like a basis of a national? When we base the average, is the average based off of?
This is according
our
to,
own average?
to the region, yes.
So we're like measuring ourselves against ourselves here.
That's
not against
correct.
the rest of the country. Okay.
Yeah, and so what you'll see happening here is that the growth concept identified many of those areas that are shown in blue on this map, where it's significantly below the regional average for the amount of travel that's happening. And so this is that plan at work, keeping destinations close by, offering a variety of transportation options. So you see urban centers, corridors popping up here. And then and it's not just Central City, right? It's all of the centers around the region that are performing well by this metric.
And this goes beyond the MSD boundaries, right? Or does it?
Yes,
I think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see little lines.
I need to point out an unexplained anomaly on this. You notice the arc of blue on the west side, and there is no transportation network in that area, either surface transportation or transit. So it's an anomaly that I do not understand, but I just need to point that out.
Can you say more about that? Sorry. We have corridors, we have light rail, we have bus.
No, the light rail comes from the
Not a light
center
rail.
out. It
Yeah.
doesn't go along the arc. There's nothing along the arc. There is no thoroughfares. There is no transit service.
Okay.
I'm just saying it's
Yeah,
an
you have a-
anomaly that we have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the staff's point, those are the majority of our town centers and our kind of like strong neighborhood areas, is like the downtown Tigard area, downtown Beaverton, downtown Hillsborough, are very dense communities for the most part.
Yeah, but they're not the high
Invested in
blue,
walkability.
but
Yeah.
that's not the high blue areas. The blue areas show further out.
No,
I mean, I
think
can't
is.
read it very
I do think,
clearly
I do
from
think it is the blue. Those are the blue.
I think that is the blue.
Yeah.
Councilor Rosenthal, we're happy to sit down after and really, maybe we could get a bigger map to look at, if that would be
It
helpful.
looks further out than that, but maybe you're right.
Yeah,
But
and-
nonetheless, we have a somewhat limited, even in that area, we have a somewhat limited transit system.
Yeah.
We don't have any north-south mass transit, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it's still light blue.
We have one bus route.
Yeah, I mean, I think what this shows is that the best transportation plan is a great land use plan. I think that is what it says.
Yes.
And to be clear, it's also connections on major roadways like Highway 217 and 26 and TV Highway.
So I think part of what is happening here is something that Councilor Gonzalez was bringing up, is that when you have these dense environments, people can run errands and things like that more easily. It's not all about commute. Commute is actually not as big of a portion of our travel than all of the other travel we do for school and et cetera. So if we can keep moving on.
Let's keep moving.
Okay.
Let's keep moving.
I'm sorry, Councilor Lewis, what?
It's okay. Let's
Okay.
keep going.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I mentioned some cost savings from transportation. The other thing that we observe is that having fewer and shorter motor vehicle trips makes our transportation system safer. Our region, of course, has a Vision Zero a goal of completely eliminating traffic fatalities. We're not there. However, when we look at a comparison of how we're doing in traffic fatalities compared to other metropolitan areas, we're doing quite well. So this shows essentially larger circle sizes or more traffic fatalities per million residents. And so this is part of the story here about some of the benefits of that compact growth and less travel that we see. If we can click forward. So moving on to climate change, and if we can advance again, we didn't talk about it. Many of us in this room were part of this discussion in the 1990s. I wasn't part of it either. But when the growth concept was adopted, climate change, I don't believe, was really much of a focus. However, it turns out that it's been crucial for addressing the need to reduce carbon emissions. And so this graph shows the state climate goal. It's that dashed line getting to zero by the year 2050. We are not there. The forecasted emissions are the green top line, and you see the various components of what needs to happen to get to that zero goal. Local and regional climate actions are there at the top. Things like compact growth that can allow people to make different transportation choices rather than driving alone. Those are crucial here. And we have existing state actions. There's still a gap, though. 33%, that light blue at the bottom is the gap that we need to fill. So in many ways, we need to figure out this puzzle of how to more effectively implement the growth concept to get there. There are also some actions that need to happen at the state level and national level, of course, that are going to be challenging. If we move forward, the climate impacts are being felt today. You all are familiar with the cooling corridors work that Metro has undertaken in the last couple of years that identified some priority corridors for addressing urban heat. And so this map depicts some work that I think will probably be familiar to you. And in many instances, urban heat is impacting some of our communities that are most vulnerable in terms of affordability and displacement. So this is something else for us to keep our eyes on. Moving forward to the next slide and changing gears a little bit to the economy. If we can advance a slide, and this gets back to that affordability by different racial and ethnic groups. This is part of what is happening is we have inequities in terms of what people are earning according to race and ethnicity. So you see the green, a light green line here, 120,000 area median income. And our white population is right at that median. Asian population exceeds it a bit. But then we see other racial and ethnic groups where these disparities really show up. The Black community, Indigenous community in particular, are not experiencing economic growth like the rest of the region. Next slide, please. So part of what we want to look at is it's always a goal that the next generation does a little bit better than the previous one. And so we had Cascadia Partners do some work for us recently that looked at this question of are younger generations doing better? And they compared our region to a number of peer regions. And what they found is that in Portland and Austin, adult workers in our region that were born in 1992 have higher incomes than those that were born in 1978. And that's in comparison with the US as a whole, where there's been a decline in the later generation, as well as Minneapolis, Denver, Salt Lake City. Next slide, please. In terms of the economy and what kinds of jobs have been produced, this is looking back from 1995 to current day, the mix of different sectors. So we've seen a lot of growth in employment sectors that serve the population. So education and healthcare, for instance, is our biggest sector. We expect that going forward as well, particularly as the population ages. I do want to point out the losses in employment at the bottom there, though, in manufacturing and natural resources and mining. Manufacturing in particular gets a lot of attention because it's a traded sector, so it brings wealth into our region. What we're seeing here is part of a nationwide trend. Again, not an excuse, but it is, if we can click forward, in keeping with trends that we see nationwide. So 20% loss in manufacturing jobs in our region. It's actually a little bit better than what it's been nationwide, 27% loss in manufacturing jobs over the same time period. You all know many of the causes there, automation, offshoring to countries with lower labor costs. And so if we're thinking about the future and the kind of economy that we want to create, this is something for us to keep our eyes on, because these are valuable jobs that can provide middle income wages. Next slide, please.
A quick question on clarification on that last one, 55% loss in natural resources and mining. Mining's never been big in Oregon. Does that include logging or forestry and agriculture? In other words, where's agricultural in this?
These are, I believe, non-farm jobs, but I'll have to look into that. But part of what's happening there is you had a small denominator, not a lot of jobs to begin with. And so if you have a little bit of a loss of.
Okay, but natural resources does include the timber industry, forestry.
I suspect it does, but let me
But
look
not
into
agriculture, okay.
Okay.
Fishing, maybe too, processing, food processing.
We'll get into agriculture in a moment. So if we can move forward. So one of the ways that Metro participates in encouraging industrial job development is by providing industrial lands in our growth management decisions. And I mentioned that these are important jobs because of their traded sector. They bring wealth to our economy. They often provide opportunities for middle incomes for people with high school educations. And what we found is similar to the story with housing urban growth boundary expansions, that it's not enough to simply add the lands, that we need a focus on site readiness. So investing in transportation facilities, in land assembly, so that patient investor need is there to hold land for the long term. And so if we look around the region, these are a number of areas that were added to the boundary dating back to 1979. These are recent aerial photos. You see a lot of them are still awaiting that industrial development. Again, not necessarily because there's not demand for sites, but because they're not ready for development.
Mr. Chair, permission to push back a little bit. We just saw a slide that said nationally, manufacturing jobs are declining. So I'm not sure your statement that it's not for lack of need for the land, it's for lack of readiness. If nationally manufacturing jobs are declining, then if this region wants to increase the percentage of manufacturing jobs we have, we essentially have to take them, either existing jobs that are somewhere and relocate them here, or grab a higher percentage than our proportional share would be to attract them here. So I do think it has to do with the demand for it. And AI is only going to expand. I don't see a trend, notwithstanding certain promises, of bringing manufacturing homes back from overseas. I think this is part of the lesson we need to take away from what's happened with expansions. We've had ambitions that we haven't, it's indefutable that we've had ambitions that were not realized. What could be debated is the causes of that. But if the national trends are such that we'd be putting ourselves in a position of having to buck the national trends, and even then have less success likely than we're counting on, that raises really interesting questions.
I appreciate all of that, Councilor Nolan, and I think that's the conversation that we'll need to have moving forward. But again, that last slide showed what has happened in data, and this also shows what has happened in terms of development on the land, and that's what we're trying to show right now. And so I appreciate that maybe sometimes we're trying to share this without a judgment of whether it's good or bad, because that's the policy conversation that you all need to have moving forward. But we can see that some of these the lands that were added for industrial purposes have developed and others haven't. And we can talk more about what is needed to make them happen. And if tying that to what's happened with manufacturing.
And I appreciate your point that we're trying to focus on understanding. But I was pushing back on Ted a little bit for a statement that said having the land available isn't sufficient and it's not because of a lack of demand. And I think the trends over the last decade, probably the last 2 decades, nationally as well as Portland, say that it is a question of demand, that the demand regionally and nationally for manufacturing jobs is declining.
Councilor, I think you bring up a good point, and this is part of the future discussion that Malou was hinting at, that demand for jobs versus demand for development more generally, I think are things to pull apart a bit with automation, and you mentioned AI happening. We may have demand for development, and it may be the case that it produces fewer jobs than it did in the past. And so that's a good discussion for you all to have.
But distinct from residential land, we don't have to compete with other metropolitan areas to experience growth in population. We do have to, given the number, because the forecasts are for some growth, slower than before, but some growth. But the forecasts nationally and the recent 20-year history says that manufacturing as a percentage of the economy is declining. So it's different. We should be looking at the absence of development on residential lands differently from the absence of development on industrial land.
Isn't it correct to conclude that since industrial activity has been declining nationally, and that's a mega trend, that's nationwide for various other reasons, but we have been bucking the trend to some extent. We have a lower thing that in fact our policies adopted in the 2040 growth plan have actually been somewhat successful. Would that be a reasonable conclusion?
Councilor, I think you can point to some of the industrial land protections that we have in place as a region that have maybe contributed to that relative success. And I think also we have the benefit of having an existing high-tech manufacturing cluster that we've worked to support over the years. And so having that in place is a strength that our region has had.
I think we also rated in the top 10 in small scale manufacturing per capita. Some recent statistics, but at any rate, so that would say that we at least were on the right track. Maybe we didn't do things perfectly, but we had some good policies.
Yeah. This is exactly the kind of conversation we're hoping to have. We have 2 more topics to get through. We're and I want you all to know that this is the beginning of a conversation. So I'm going to ask Ted to keep moving.
Okay. And I can be quick because I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in the next 2 topics. So if we can click forward 2 slides and 1 more slide, farmland. So the growth concept was very much focused on protecting farms and forests outside the boundary. And so we wanted to look at how we're doing in that regard. Agriculture is a big part of our regional economy, so this ties to the previous topic, I suppose. In 3-county area in 2022, just under $1 billion worth of agricultural products were sold. So this is a big part of our economy. What Metro does, of course, to protect this is largely through urban growth management. So you all are familiar with urban and rural reserves, which are depicted on that growth concept. Rural reserves are 269,000 acres that are outside the boundary today that are off limits for urbanization through at least the year 2065. And so that's how we, as a region, provide some certainty to this agricultural sector for the long term. And if we can look to the next slide, this shows the change in acres of land in agriculture. So if you look on the right to those two bars, 1997 is in gray, 2022 total acreage in agriculture for the 3-county area, slight decline as a 3-county area, and then it's broken out here by county as well. So you'll see where some of those changes have happened. Next slide, please.
Is that within our growth concept, or is that just counties including all the way to the county borders?
This is the full county. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So moving on to our final topic, parks and nature. I saw Jonathan was here earlier, so if I get any tough questions, yeah.
Stay back there.
So Metro cares for about 20,000 acres in the region for parks and nature. This was, again, part of the growth concept. The nature wasn't going to be something that you visited that was somewhere else. The idea was that it was interwoven within the urban area, that people would be able to access it. So what we have in our portfolio is about the size of 4 forest parks. So it's a lot of land that voters have consistently asked us to protect and provide access to. Next slide, please. Just to show a little bit about access to those parks, open spaces, and trails. This map is also from our regional housing coordination strategy, so it may look familiar. The hashed areas are equity focus areas, and that's a geography that you may be familiar with from our regional transportation plan that looked at portions of the region that have higher than regional average of people speaking languages other than English, lower income, higher concentrations of non-white populations. And so when you overlay that with where the parks, open spaces, and trails are, you see a pretty good distribution here. The Trust for Public Land keeps statistics on this. About 80% of the population in the urban area can walk to a park in 10 minutes. That is my last slide other than our discussion slide. I appreciate how interested you all have been.
So I know that was a lot of information, and you've provided some of your reactions along the way and what you've been surprised about. Acting President Wong, I'd like to see how you view, I know Councilor Gonzalez had something to say and I cut him off, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Colleagues, any additional questions, comments? Okay.
Oh, I do have something. So just I know that a fantastic conversation, by the way. This is awesome. On the kind of the jobs trends over the last 30 years, we were talking about manufacturing and the general trends. I'm wondering if, like, in the last 2 years, due to a national election, geopolitics, and, kind of international trade behavior, are we noticing a shift in, like, a renationalization of jobs or something like that? Or not, that might not be the right word, but like manufacturing coming back? Or is it just like, what data are we seeing there? Is it too early to tell if there's a trend? I guess I'm trying to wonder, like, generally, is the world rejecting to some degree globalization or not? Or is it just like a flash in the pan? It's a great question, I think.
It is a good question. I think, to make it even more complicated, we often talk about a lot of the jobs having gone to China, manufacturing jobs. And, what you see happening there now is the effects of automation, where they're having losses in the manufacturing sector in terms of jobs. So I think it's It's a bit complicated to answer the question, there may be an uptick in industrial land development nationwide, but I think it's a good question whether that's resulting in more jobs in manufacturing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it would be really cool for this group, this council, to do some research around those global trends. I mean, generally speaking, from what I've been able to learn over the last few years, that there is a significant amount of automation, robotics, and so there's just there's just a lot of technology that's changing things that we even knew 5 or 10 years ago. And obviously right now in my district is ground zero for a very, very prevalent issue, data centers, which are very intense on land, water, electricity, and fairly low in benefit to Oregonians. And I think that there's going to be a lot of conflict, I think, as our world becomes more, AI woven, in how we try and find a balance for those things, if there is a balance to find. So I think in a lot of ways, the data looking backwards, it feels like it's really helpful, but the problems going forward are going to be so uniquely different. And how we reckon with that is I'm just eager to dive into whatever we can find, for sure.
I think there are some great questions there about, how do you make sure that residents of the region, your constituents, are benefiting from the development that happens?
Mm-hmm.
Could I add to that? Because I think you said data centers, and I know that y'all have been kudos to y'all fighting on that front. I actually had not a constituent, but a concerned citizen reach out from Hood River, who owns an orchard where there is a data center already currently, and they're talking about diverting their water from Highland to the data center, which would impact the orchid, the ecosystem, the wildlife.
Yeah.
I think we got a bigger fight on our hands than what we originally thought.
So counselors, I'll remind you that when you think back to when Aaron and team were here talking about economic development and some of the upcoming conversations that you all will have related to industrial land use and data centers is one of those topics that Annalisa will be working to bring people here for you to learn and have a conversation about. So we are trying to have a series of conversations that will touch on some of these issues. And then while I'm talking, I do hope that one of the questions we had for you was that we're hoping to hear from you all, and it doesn't have to be now if we're running late, but we'd love to have you send us your thoughts about locations around the region that you think have been really successful coming out of the last 30 years so that we can think about how we can put what tools are really working well that helped create those places. What do we need to do to tweak? That's something that would be really helpful as we're moving from where we are thinking about a future vision that's a vision to how we get there. So I just wanted to be sure that I said that. And also that we have a panel on June 2nd that is going to be a conversation about equity in our region today and how, what we might need to consider to support a more equitable future. That will be moderated by our Chief Operating Officer, Marisa Madrigal. And we're also going to have another panel conversation on June 17th that will be moderated by Rachel Hatch from the Institute for the Future that's focused on kind of regional resilience and human networks. So those panels are kind of aimed at thinking about taking lessons that we've learned and thinking about how we apply that to the future.
Councilor Nolan?
Couple of things. I will take time to write some other thoughts down, but immediate responses to the question about what's been successful. I think while we've had some bumps along the tracks, as it were, on our light rail transit system, if you look at those maps, you can not only see the town centers, which was a success, but you can see the corridors. And they don't match perfectly, but along the max lines, there is further density in development and still really fabulous, attractive neighborhoods that people can enjoy. So I'd call that a success. I also have flown out over between here and the coast, and you can see the urban growth boundary as if it's drawn on the ground. And you don't see that in cities like Phoenix or Tucson or Dallas, where you have been able to preserve that farmland for forestry, for wines, for vegetables, for grass seed. Those are successes that I think we should learn a little more about. Then I want to get to a point about when we're looking at jobs, I would hope we all can agree that we want to look at jobs and income simultaneously. Because dumbing down the portion, moving toward a workforce that separates more between highly skilled workers and employees and unskilled, and doesn't have the middle ground, which you're right, Ted, historically, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, was supported by manufacturing and construction jobs, largely. Middle class. I am not interested in measuring what we want to do here just in the number of jobs. It should be measured in the prosperity of the people living in the region and their access to enjoying their region. And maybe let's dream big and get back to a point where, although the typical household of 2 parents and 2.5 kids doesn't exist anymore. There was a time when a middle-class family could sustain middle-class status on the strength of one adult's income. And that would be revolutionary for us to want to pursue again. Maybe that other adult takes care of kids, maybe they go back to school for something, but requiring that prosperity makes 2 adults have to work 2.5 or 3 jobs to sustain that isn't a future that I would want us to be pursuing. Gets to your point about the well-paid workforce. Thanks.
Angelos?
Sure, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you let us kind of stop along the way and ask some questions. In particular, one of the thoughts that I had was that some of our most recent transportation data is from 2020. That was kind of a weird year. I didn't really drive my car except around the block to make sure it still turned on every now and then. And I know a lot of people are in similar boats, that 2020 wasn't truly representative of how they move around the region. But when we saw those dots around crash data and the safety, we have made some remarkable progress. But the fact is, the safer roads are actually our highways, and it is our municipally owned roads that are the most dangerous. Because when there's speed in a corridor like Highway 43 or like 122nd, that is when it kills, not when you're going that same speed on 205. So I think there's a real mismatch between where we spend our time and attention as a region, both because it's the kind of money we have, but also it's where we are high centered. And I want us to be more looking at the grid of corridors we put together for 2019, 2020, get moving. Those are the corridors that need the safety improvements. Those are the corridors that need us to really dig in and provide leadership. So I would hope as we look back in the transportation space, if we are going to be guided by safety, we have to be pushing ourselves to spend more time on our local roads. I had some other thoughts around manufacturing, but they somehow have left my mind. I might raise my hand again, but I had transportation on mind.
Where's Councilor Rosenthal?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a suggestion. In other presentations or sometime in the future for a roundtable or whatever, we have a slide suggesting where we think we've had successes and then maybe one where we've had failures. If I remember correctly, back when the 2040 plan was developed, we had a bunch of things: protect farmland, all right, increase urban centers, develop mass transit, increase diversity. We've had some successes in, or improved manufacturing. We've had some successes and we've had some failures. And I think it's important to point those out. You sort of embedded a few of those in your comments today, but I would put them all in a row and open them up for debate. I can think of things where we haven't been successful. I don't think, but I think it's important to say that that according to some of the measures that we had, we actually have achieved some of the goals and missed others. And I think looking at the difference of what we achieved versus what we haven't achieved is going to be instructive in pointing forward for the next 50 years. Because again, some of them we can control, we have less control than we think. There's natural and national trends. And I mean, this region was changed by the fact that Intel decided to move here. That was just a big change. But that started when Tektronix came out of local Oregon development and then developed the electronic industry. So there's things that have long-term growth patterns that you can't predict and you can't really control. So, one other word about data. It occurs to me that we have sort of faltered a little bit on being the regional data resource center. And this gets into the data farms. That's the technical aspect. But, you know, I grew up spending a lot of time with the Council of Governments down in Eugene, and growth was controlled or managed, I should say, not controlled, because the regional entity was the data control center. It was the go-to place. And I heard this last night on one of these forums, focus groups, where somebody said, what do you know about Metro? And the guy said, well, I used to go to Metro all the time because of the regional information center, the data, the GIS system. He said, I don't use it anymore. So he doesn't know if Metro does anything anymore. So I'm just saying data is always important. And to the extent that we have not focused on the use of data to unite people and unite governments is something that we should consider.
Thank you, Acting President Wong. Yeah, I want to share a few reflections that I haven't already shared. But first, if I could share some just general response to Councilor Rosenthal. I mean, I absolutely agree. And I just want to remind all of us that I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a presentation from Central Services, which showed that our data systems have like, I think 300 million pings a year or something like that. So our data is more prevalent than it ever has been in terms of regional decision making and being a repository for local governments, for local universities. And that is a huge strength that we can. So, I mean, I think we just talked about it. We allocated a major budget to it. We're one of the few places, I think, in the state that invests at this scale in that work. So I just want to acknowledge the huge work that we're doing there. And obviously always an opportunity to do more and to remind folks about the use of that. So I just wanted to share that since it was a really recent conversation. Kind of coming to three themes, hopefully saying things that are new that I haven't said before. Around agriculture and farms, I think that we should maybe not hold to the same standard, but at least ask similar questions about the jobs, the wages that people get in those jobs. I know that as a country we have a very strong relationship with our agriculture, with farmers, with the owners of farms. But this country, I feel like, sees farm workers as expendable, and people that make 60 cents a bucket of blueberries or something like that. That's the community I grew up in, and so the kind of the romance of that is a tale of two communities, and sometimes I get really frustrated, honestly, when we don't acknowledge that incredible disparity that exists there as well. And so I think that should be a part of the dialogue. And I believe that our agriculture should be a very important part of the state for generations, for centuries to come. And at the same time, if we're going to work very hard to protect, then there are very high expectations that I think that the humans that work in that space, that they deserve. They also deserve the healthcare and the jobs and the benefits and the wages that people can afford to live here. I just never comes up in these circles, and I wanted to bring that up. Second, around just general jobs, non-farm jobs. I've been thinking a lot about the Governor's Prosperity Council, and just yesterday there was an article that was released on Oregon Journalism Project that was kind of assessing a draft that would be potentially going to the governor. And one of the elements that I feel like is constantly missing in our conversation is, I don't want our economy to be a back office to California. Which is even Intel, as great as an example as that is, it's a major company that chooses to do business here, sets up a manufacturing spot. You see the same thing with data centers or with other major companies that are like, they have cheap water, cheap electricity. Sure, we'll go do some work there. And I say that because, I want us to own things. I want us to have the strong ideas, the innovation clustered in the OMSI district, in downtown, in different parts of the region where it's Oregon-grown companies that are a part of that. Not just, we have a blank slate for, people to come do things, which is a part of our economy. But when I think about the large successes that we look at in the past few years, and Councilor Rosenthal brought up Intel, which is a huge part of my district. You can look at a lot of those examples. It's the Oregon-grown companies have really struggled over the last few years. And I think one last thing is we look at kind of national trends and we compare ourselves. And I do think we need to compare ourselves to competitor regions like Austin, Raleigh, whatever. And they might do things that might not be aligned with our values or growing in certain ways, but they're certainly growing. They're more affordable. I wouldn't say we're losing people to them, but they're absorbing people at a much different rate than we are. And there are just trade-offs. There are trade-offs. And I think if we don't acknowledge those trade-offs, that we will not be as inclusive, that we will not be as affordable, that we will not be a place that continues to want to welcome those things. I think if our policy wants to acknowledge that and say, sure, we're going to be this other thing, then also acknowledge that it probably bakes in a specific outcome as well. And I think if that's the will of Oregonians, that's the will of Oregonians. But I think we haven't gotten to that deeper question that I'm hoping that we can all talk about. So anyway, those three things kind of different from, I think, what I've said in the past, but.
Councilor Lewis?
Sure, thank you. Picking up on the industrial manufacturing, I think this presentation is the first time I've seen the 11 parcels brought in for industrial over the past 30, 40 years, 30, and the progress and lack of progress in some of them. And I think the kind of common interpretation is that either the land comes into the UGB with some speculative future use that the public narrative seems to demonize those landowners. And looking at the parcels in my district, I know some of those landowners and I know their future plans that are dependent not only on future infrastructure, specifically water and road, but also dependent on future population needs. So just as we look at our land banking that we want to do for housing affordability, I think there are some folks out there who have made investments and are land banking for providing services when populations stabilize. And that's perfectly reasonable. So I just kind of want to put it out there that each of those, I think it was 11 little pictures, is far more complex. And I think we would either want to dive in individually on some of the typologies of the investments that are needed, or some of the individual pictures, literal pictures, before we really say that that slide is really helping us tell our story. Because I think just that slide alone can actually do more harm than good in saying there hasn't been the development we want, and there's probably only one or two reasons why. Each one is a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. And then I also really want to lift up what Councilor Gonzalez was saying about agriculture, and that agriculture is such a person driven field where there have been very few innovations and mechanizations that have changed. Yes, we do irrigation with machines now instead of people holding hoses, but it is still extremely labor intense. And I think that the work of differentiating some of our more manual processes in manufacturing, in working the land, in all of the kind of jobs and industry this region supports, it's important for us to think about who's doing the work, why they're doing the work, and how innovation in those fields, literal fields, but how innovation can be spurred by the right kind of investment. And that should be part of our mission.
Thanks. Great conversations. Just a few quick things for me. I noticed there was 2 slides where we showed kind of like economic attainment through income and also cost burden for housing. And we use aggregated data, especially in the Asian category. I think those are one of those slides that do more harm than good when we tell that story, because in both they were it seems that this community does better than the white community or whomever, so top of the list. But I think you have future vision commissioners that work with Southeast Asian communities in East County, and that is not the story. So I think it's really important when we aggregate like that to still think about the differences. I think for the Asian category, you probably have a lot of like engineers in the West Side that really bring up average wages, but from refugee immigrant communities, those aren't the wages that we're seeing. So I just want us to be really thoughtful about how we portray that data and make decisions on it in terms of public policy. And then, one thing that I've been thinking about is as the region becomes more diverse, like we're starting to see ethnic enclaves be developed across the region. And I'm thinking of some like Beaverton, Northern Washington County, like school districts that have 65-70%, Asian American students now. And I think that like you see those kind of trends in like, California or the DMV on the East Coast. And I think how those kind of enclaves are best supported is something that Future Vision might be thinking about more, because that's an emerging trend I think we're going to see as a West Coast city. And yeah, like how do we be thoughtful around housing mix, transportation, and all that when you have majority minority, like census tracts, communities, neighborhoods, cities, sort of thing, which is something completely different than the past future vision that we had, where our region wasn't as diverse back in the 70s, 80s, but what does that mean now, and how does that intersect with our planning processes? So, yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thanks for the deep conversation. Looking forward to many more of these. So thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much for all of your time, and just going to remind you of a little homework assignment. If there are places that you feel like are really successful, please send them our way so that we can be thinking about them, and really appreciate all of your very thoughtful comments and ideas and time. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
All right. Our next and last presentation, we have large scale community visions, direction on timeline and funding. We'll turn now to our parks and metro areas. We'll revisit the large scale community visions program. Through this program, council has been able to collect or allocate funds for transformative community projects that center and preserve natural areas in our community. And supporting projects that are community driven, each project is unique in terms of readiness. Today's work session is an opportunity to discuss next steps and timelines for these projects. Along with our Parks and Nature Director, John Blasher, we have Elizabeth Guzman Arroyo, Community Investments Manager, and Linda Bartolini Venegas.
Right.
Welcome.
Good morning. Is it still morning? Yeah, just about. Acting President Wong and councilors, thanks for having us today. John Blasher, he, him, his Parks and Nature Director. Today with Linda Bartolini Venegas and Elizabeth Guzman Arroyo, who I believe will be online. She hasn't already been promoted. Great. So we're here to discuss Parks and Nature's large scale community visions program. Go to the next slide, please. So today we'll be providing an overview of the large scale community visions program, as well as updates on some of the previously conditionally awarded projects. These two agenda items are to help raise some awareness and provide broader context for your discussion, as we'll be asking for your direction on a proposed strategy for setting some timelines and building a little bit more urgency for program awardees that should be aligned with the council vision and priorities. We'll go to the next slide, please. So as you know, the program was new to Metro as part of the 2019 Parks and Nature Bond. It was created by Metro Council to fund transformative projects of regional significance that bring together nature, affordable housing, safe transportation, and workforce development opportunities. By leveraging public and private investments, these complex, innovative projects increase access to nature in urban areas while supporting affordable housing, reliable transportation, and job creation. So the impetus of this program was to really be innovative in what we could fund and how we could use that power of investment in natural areas to help knit together community amenities. Since this program funds larger multi-benefit projects, the amount of the awards range from $1 to $10 million. And as part of the general obligation bonds, they require a public owner to capitalize the final asset. So the pilot round launched in 2023. Second cycle is in 2024, and the final cycle is currently open. Since that program has launched, we've had 3 projects awarded, and we'll go into a little bit more of the detail of each of those as we talk about some next steps. So go to the next slide, and I'm going to pass it to Linda.
Great. Thank you, John. Good morning, councilors. Almost good afternoon. As John mentioned, the pilot round launched in 2023, and in May of that year, council conditionally awarded 3 projects in Multnomah County. Vina Vision Trust for up to $5 million for site acquisition, OMSI and the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, or CRIPFIC, for up to $7 million for development of the Waterfront Education Park, and up to $3.5 million to Oregon State University and Trust for Public Land for acquisition of over 3,000 acres in the Tualatin Mountains. You'll notice that this last project is not included on this slide as it was unable to meet one condition of program funding, which is for projects to be located within the urban growth boundary. However, since the project was located within Metro's Multnomah Channel headwaters target area, a separate funding source was identified, which meant that the pilot round went from an original allocation of 15.5 million to 12 million. The pilot round is over allocated by $2 million. In December of 2024, Metro Council awarded 10 million to the Kellogg Creek Restoration Project in Milwaukee, a partnership between the North Clackamas Watershed Council, ODOT, City of Milwaukee, and American Rivers. The competitive grant portion of this program has awarded $22 million to date, and these three projects are not yet under contract. So we're going to dive into the details and status of each project in the next few slides. So next slide, please. Okay, so Albina Vision Trust initially applied for funding for acquisition adjacent to the Willamette River as part of its work to restore and reconnect the historic Laura Albina neighborhood. In this image, that would be the area outlined with the dashed line. Since then, their vision for large-scale community vision funding has shifted towards the opportunity to acquire the 10.2-acre Portland Public School site, which is outlined in purple and highlighted with a star on that slide. This site is located within the same 94-acre Albina Vision Project area of Laura Albina, and the site offers the chance to create the residential heart of Laura Albina. The Portland Public Schools Master Plan Park Project will create a publicly accessible multi-use park and greenway within the 10.2-acre site. Project will transform currently underutilized land into a network of native plantings, shared plazas, play and gathering spaces, stormwater features, and tree canopy. The park will serve as the neighborhood's green restoring habitat, reducing heat islands and providing equitable and daily access to nature while maintaining a visual and ecological connection to the Willamette River. Next slide, please. So a little bit on timeline. As mentioned earlier, this project was conditionally awarded 3 years ago in May 2023, and is currently in the process of master plan development and approval for that Portland Public Schools site. As John mentioned, a committed public honor is necessary to enter into an agreement with this project, and Albina Vision Trust is currently in discussions with Portland Parks and Recreation regarding Portland Parks and Rec serving as the holder of a future public easement associated with the district open space network, which will ensure public access to the future park. Albina Vision Trust has selected its Central City Master Plan Design Team and is preparing to formally launch the district master planning and design process in the second quarter of this year. As you can see from this timeline, this process is underway and expected to be finalized in late 2027, at which point AVT will gain site control of the Portland Public Schools site. Moving forward, the easement is anticipated to be granted to the City of Portland in late 2028, with demolition and park construction anticipated to start in 2029 through 2031. Next slide, please. OMSI and CRITFIG is the other project from the pilot round that applied for funding for development of the Waterfront Education Park, which is located in their larger district vision. Construction of the Waterfront Education Park will restore tribal presence to the Willamette with a tribal design park creating access to the river for all. It will include plazas, public green space, restored riverfront habitats, viewing platforms, hands-on outdoor science programming, and interpretation that affirms, sustains, and shares traditional, ecological, and cultural knowledge and cultural connection to the river. Next slide, please. Similar to Albina Vision Trust, OMSI and CRITFIG were conditionally awarded 3 years ago in May. Similar to Albina Vision Trust, a committed public owner is necessary to enter into an agreement for this project. OMSI is working with Portland Parks and Rec to hold an ownership interest jointly proposed by their public-private partnership that will comply with state laws regarding general obligation bond expenditures. This quarter, CRITFIG and OMSI applied for a 2040 planning grant to support the development of their district identity plan, which is a framework to design the brand identity, wayfinding, signage, public art, and cultural strategy and physical design guidelines of green infrastructure, landscape, and materials for the district. This plan is a condition of approval from the city master plan, and any development in the district will depend on final approval of this plan by the city. Once funding is secured, the RFP will be issued to select a design team for this work and the Waterfront Education Park. OMSI and CRITFIG are currently developing the RFP process that will be used to select a design team for both the district identity plan and the Waterfront Education Park. Once initial design funding is secured, the RFP will be issued, and they are anticipating that design will take up to 24 months. OMSI is embarking on a capital campaign to fully fund the design and construction of the waterfront education park, as Metro funds will only be used for a portion of that park. Next slide, please. Okay, so the second cycle of the program, council awarded the Kellogg Creek Restoration and Community Enhancement Project 10 million. Located in Milwaukee, this project will remove the barrier at Kellogg Dam, which will provide fish passage to 17 miles of habitat, restore 14 acres of high quality riparian habitat, and restore the creek through Kellogg Lake, which will also increase flood storage capacity to reduce flooding in lower Kellogg Creek. This project will also modernize the existing Oregon State Highway 99 East Bridge, create a multimodal trail underpass, public access and viewing points, and provide interactive learning, scientific research, and real-world laboratory opportunities for student involvement. Next slide, please. So this project was awarded at the end of 2024, approximately a year and a half ago. It's currently in the design phase, which is fully funded by a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA grant. And design is anticipated to be completed in 2027, with construction targeted for 2028 through 2030, with a 2 to 3 year construction window. Metro large-scale community vision funds could be spent at the beginning of the construction period and prior to December 2031. Since this project is a partnership, a private-public partnership, and the public partners are on board, Metro staff have been actively coordinating with the Kellogg Creek Project leadership team to develop and finalize an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Milwaukee and ODOT, with the goal of a mutually agreed upon agreement this year. So that is the general update and status on the conditionally awarded projects for large-scale community visions. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth, who is joining us remotely.
Thank you, Linda. And hello, Councilor. Sorry for not being able to join you in person today. As mentioned previously, Metro Council has made conditional awards totaling up to 22 million since the program launched. However, these awards have not yet been finalized through formalized agreements. We're currently in the third and final competitive grant cycle for the program, which has 8 million in available funds. And at this point, the program must balance demand with the reality that a significant portion of previously awarded funding has not yet been spent by program awardees. The Large-Scale Community Visions program, in its goal of funding transformative and complex projects, faces a unique set of challenges, including securing a willing public partner for the pilot round projects as required by state law, advancing projects to agreement, and managing bond spend down timelines. Given these challenges, staff seek council direction on a proposed strategy to establish clear timelines for awarded projects not yet under contract, and we'll go into the details of that proposal. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, it was the 22 million that were allocated. We have 8 million for the third round. Some of the challenges include securing a public partner, getting to formalized agreement, and of course, doing a bond spend down by our target goal of June 2031. Next slide, please. So each large-scale community visions designated project faces a distinct set of complex challenges in advancing towards agreement, execution, and grant funding expenditure. We're essentially proposing establishing a clear timeline of 2028 for all grantees to finalize both a public-private ownership agreement and a contract with Metro. And then to access grant funds, each grantee must also submit a fully drafted scope of work, ensuring that their plans are clear, actionable, and aligned with the 2019 Parks and Nature Bond. By instituting this timeline, we're ensuring greater accountability, greater transparency, and a structured path towards the public benefit that we've promised in our region. This timeline also ensures that Metro has sufficient time to meet the 2031 bond spend down deadlines. And if projects are unable to meet the required milestones or reach agreements with a public partner within this time frame, this approach also allows Metro the ability to strategically reallocate any unspent program funds, which could again be up to $22 million. Next slide, please. Now, we also understand that the depth of these types of projects require additional time to develop, And so if this timeline is adopted, staff will continue to maintain relationships with awardees and leverage expertise across our agency to explore multiple pathways to supporting the projects as needed. This approach allows us to be strategic and efficient with program funding, remain accountable to bond requirements and council-approved criteria and outcomes, and preserve flexibility for future funding decisions. Ultimately, this approach balances both urgency and flexibility, supporting projects and moving forward while ensuring responsible stewardship of limited public funds and preserving the ability to reallocate funds if key milestones are not met. Next slide, please. Now, before we get to our discussion, we did want to frame up some future council touch points for you. So as the third cycle is currently open, we'll be returning to council on June 30th to discuss submitted applications through a work session with an offsite council meeting scheduled for July 21st to select and award projects for this third and final round. If council approves the timeline set forth today, we will include adoption of that timeline for all competitive grants awarded through the program in that resolution on July 21st. And of course, finally, we'll continue to provide you all with ongoing updates on how the program and the awarded projects are progressing through that 2028 timeline. And I'll hand it over to John to open up for the discussion.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We can go to the next slide, please. So with all of that, we'd like to open this topic up for council discussion and direction. And given that context today and on the status of the program's previously awarded projects, try to get a sense of how council wishes to proceed. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on you support establishing these clear deadlines for the projects, the progress, as well as if you support setting that 2028 as the proposed timeline for demonstrating the measurable progress towards readiness, which is getting those executed agreements with the public entities and the IGAs with Metro. And with that, I will turn it back to you, President.
Thank you. I'll start with Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thanks so much. First, I want to start off and say the three projects here today are all incredible projects and are exactly why we set aside this bucket of money. And the work here is about recognizing that our funds unlock these opportunities. We are the first dollar in, the first real dollar in, big dollar in these projects that has helped build momentum and get them to where they are today. So I think despite staff calling them conditional, I think we're cheerleading. So I understand the conditions are that we have to spend these dollars by the time all our bonds need to be expended. But I actually think that these are our three premier projects and not like in the penalty box. So I just really want to overemphasize that these projects are the reason we do this. High risk, super high reward. I'm a little uncomfortable about 28, only because if we can hope and pray and channel all of the goddesses, we might see a different world in 29 when it comes to federal funding. And in one of those projects in particular, there is some hinging on what kind of federal transportation dollars might be available. Kellogg really had hoped to use our dollars to help match for IIJA funds because there was $1 billion for FIST passage. And that's been incredibly slow walked / not unlocked. I think we might know more in a year, but I don't think we're going to know in 28 for sure. So in terms of having a scope finalized in 28, I would hate to say that it has to be finalized in 28 if in 29 we could have a bigger, grander vision of what could get funded with federal dollars. So I think I have a little asterisk on 28, which is if somebody's put a scope forward in 28, I'm still comfortable with them having a best case and a worst case scenario within that scope around federal funding and federal match. So mostly positive on what you presented in terms of the three, public ownership or easement or access, yes. Have an IGA, yes. But scope, I think we can be a little bit more squishy on.
Thank you, Councilor Lewis.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, thanks, Acting President Wong. I mean, I agree with the point that Councilor Lewis made that these are like signature flagship projects. that I think have really inspired the curiosity of thousands to think about what our built environment could be with a strong connection to nature. And so I want to like just absolutely so happy that we have this funding source. In terms of your recommendation, I am in I think a slightly more supportive space of the timeline. And not necessarily that I want to put projects on a penalty box per se, but I do think because it's a new program, we've learned a lot along the way. And I want to see things move. And I think that every cycle that we've made an award in this kind of fund, we've asked for deeper clarity around what is it exactly that what's your timeline, what's your funding stack, what's the I guess like deliverability, right, of actually of that and the timeline. And I mean, right now we're going through another round of really competitive projects as well. And I want to continue to to focus the readiness aspect. And if someone has an incredible vision, but the pathway seems to maybe have eroded, or there's not something in the next 2, 3, 4 years that feels confidence, then there are a set of projects that have a much clearer path. Like, let's deliver things for people. And I keep thinking about the polls that we all see and the reports that we get about, governments having such a low level of credibility and trust that we can deliver things. My focus is on wanting to deliver things. And so that is why I'm supportive of this timeline. And it could give us a really strong touch point with partners that we've made commitments to say, all right, what's this point from here that we go forward on. So that being said, I'm very supportive of these projects, and I really want to see them move forward. As I mentioned, they are premier projects, and we're also living in a time where the funding environment has completely shifted underneath us. And so 2029 there might be a lot of potential there for us. And at the same time, we might have to look elsewhere. So just my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Just a quick comment. I want to concur with both Councilors Lewis and Councilors Gonzalez. I think it's important, particularly the public involvement and the IGA. As for the other one, I'm assuming that if something dramatic happens, either withholding of funds or all of a sudden releasing of funds, we could possibly revisit the complete scope aspect at some later date if we had to. So I think that these set the signal that we just can't wait forever. We want people to pay attention. I think they're very transformative projects, and I hope they move forward.
Thank you.
Chair.
Sorry, I hit the button. I'm here. I just want to weigh in on the question.
Go ahead.
I had not thought of the concern that Councilor Lewis raised, and I think it's important for us to be aware of it. We went through a rigorous process, and in the first round, if I recall correctly, ended up with essentially only 3 projects that were eligible. We had a couple other problems, or was that a different metro? My point being, this is a new program. Round 1 was people, I think organizations capable of having the vision and the capacity to deliver weren't tuned in as much 2 years ago when we first went out for those submittals. But there is a complex project involved with the Kellogg Creek improvements, a lot of funding. There is value in being the first dollar in. And we also have round 3 coming up that word has it has some other visionary, landmark opportunities in it.
I would be supportive of a little bit of accommodation, but not perpetual. I don't think anybody wants to be here 10 years from now, still holding money for a project that's not funded in Milwaukee. And I don't know I haven't constructed on the fly what that compromise would be. But perhaps it could come along in the fashion of a deadline of 28 with an asterisk for any of the three, because I think if we do it, we have to do it for all three, that if they don't meet that, they get some kind of preferential treatment in holding on to those funds, which may take the form of a 12-month extension for them if there's some other commitment evidenced by the project. But it wouldn't break my heart if we followed Councilor Gonzalez's recommendation. I love the Kellogg Creek project, but I am really with you on your assertion, Councilor, that government needs to deliver. We need to have results to show to people that we are capable of not just thinking big stuff, but delivering big stuff. So somewhere in there, I would love if the staff or other council members want to work on how we could have both, but with the real incentive, a real deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see a deadline as well. I think one thing that I've seen is local jurisdictions will sit on it unless there's some urgency.
True.
And if they feel like there's an urgency, I mean, they don't want to lose funding, they'll act. But absent that like deadline, they're just gonna be like, we're busy right now, which has been painfully clear. So having a deadline is important. I think if people have good reasons for extension or delay, I think that's fine. That's something that we ought to consider. But having like a clear deadline, I think, will open some doors. We talked about some of the strategy behind it, and one thing this is like not on your questions, but just looking for opportunities of synergy in our complex community visions. Like I had Councilor Rosenthal attended a briefing from the City Club on Ross Island and being able to use fill from other parts of the river and the Superfund, for example. And I think some of the opportunities might present themselves in this round as well. So I think it's important to review each application as standalone applications, but also see the big picture. Because each applicant may not know there might be synergy of another project. So I don't know how staff wants to weigh and consider that, but I think the council would be interested in viewing all the projects holistically and how actually it might reinforce each other, even if they're not thinking like that just yet. Just a comment. Okay, we'll sing number questions. Thanks for the updates.
Andrew, want to say something?
One quick comment. Yeah, no, this is really helpful. And John, add anything. I'm hearing general support for setting some deadlines because I think it does move folks. But again, being thoughtful about those deadlines and making sure we're not being rigid just for rigidity's sake. I did want to just add one thing. I think it'd be useful for council to continue a conversation about the political side of getting some of these agreements. I know, Councilor Wong, you've been active in talking to the City of Portland about some of these. I think for all of these projects, it would be helpful to let us know. This is probably less parks, maybe a little bit more Gap D, but to the extent that we need to move these forward, some of it's going to be at your level, and figuring out which elected officials we need to call and where we need to put that pressure in order to get some of this movement. Because I think staff are doing a lot in terms of having those staff level conversations, but at some point we do need to elevate, and we have successfully. So I'm just thinking about we can put some staff level deadlines in the criteria. How do we also develop a political strategy that accompanies that, to your point, if these are, sort of the, what was the word you used? The premier sort of bond projects, then great, let's get them done, right?
And thanks, Andrew. And I think our colleagues at various jurisdictions also want to see them done. A lot of times they just don't know. So, I spent a good chunk of the early part of this year meeting with every Portland City Councilor to make these exact points of like, this is a project that Metro has funded. You might not know about it. We both really believe in this vision. And if the city doesn't act, they're going to go away. And I think that was a powerful message, which I think helped unlock, hopefully, conversation on the staff level as well. So I think a lot of times colleagues just are our friends at various jurisdictions, they might not know these investments have been made. So I would encourage you to reach out and raise the awareness of our premier projects. Councilor Wolf.
Yeah, sure. I just want to acknowledge that the project that I centered my comments on is the one that's going to happen no matter what. It's received our funding, it's received a congressional earmark, thanks to Congresswoman Bynum. It is just a matter of, does it happen in the mini version or the big grand version? So to that extent, I'm maybe retracting my words about the scope, because I don't think we'll ever complain about them doing a little bit better than they say they're going to do in their scope. So the importance of the deadline for other jurisdictions that aren't in the unique place is Kellogg, where Kellogg has the municipality as a project partner. I will retract my comments. I just really want to focus on making sure that we are able to build the best projects possible. And for that, we would maybe need an accommodation if future federal funding changes. But the importance of not being wishy-washy for other jurisdictions, I see that value. So let's move forward with the 3 benchmarks as recommended by staff.
Thanks. Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, I think I would be remiss if I didn't make 2 comments. One is that I think we have some positive potential support with the Portland mayor, who has expressed some interest in tying a lot of the riverfront together with a regional trail, and has shown some ideas. And then I also think that we also have to, as I've said several times, I think we have to consider these all as part of a larger river vision that includes particularly Willamette Cove. It includes the Albina district. It includes the OMSI district. It includes a bunch of things all the way up and down the river. And I think this is part of both a conceptual vision for the region as well as an economic development vision for the region. And so it's something that I strongly support. But getting them to take it seriously is an important aspect.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, I fully support the vision of a strong rivers for the entire region. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm happy to hear the conversation where it's landing, and I think if as a council, I want us to also think about the work through the lens of like the next decade as well. I mean, we need to, hopefully next year we'll have the opportunity to refer Parks and Nature levy for renewal, right? And like the story that we want to tell about what we've been able to achieve, I think is something that we're going to continue to all work on together. But also, I mean, we're all, not that we're halfway through this 20-year bond measure, because we're not quite there yet, maybe more of a 1/3 or 2/5, whatever, of the way there. I mean, I would love for this program, the large scale community vision, to be one that is experiencing incredible success, and one that we want to re-up in whatever 2038, 2039, Parks and Nature renewal, or the council at that time decides to take up. And so I'm just thinking a lot about like the proof of concept, a little bit of a history lesson for folks that weren't on the council in 2019 when we referred this Parks and Nature bond, but there was some consternation from the community, the Parks and Nature community, about this specific bucket of money and, the goals. What is it going to actually achieve? These dollars are not going towards acquisitions. They're not going towards restorations. They're not going towards existing parks. And so, again, I just want to qualify what I'm saying. And this is more so not for us, but for our partners that might be listening and being like, oh, are they going to pull my money? That we're thinking it through this lens of what we want to support them to do. And very grateful for Councilor Wong for meeting with City Portland city councilors. And I mean, at a minimum, we need like very strong partnership with local jurisdictions for 2028. And I think we expect that for every partner going forward, like higher tests than what we did in the first round. So that's kind of what I wanted to clarify from my earlier comments. Thanks.
If I may, can I respond?
Oh, sure, please.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Council President and councilors. Yeah, just to recap, so I'm hearing clear direction that we'll go forward with establishing deadline and for by 2028, we're looking at including it in potentially upcoming resolution when you all adopt this next round of awards, so we can do that seamlessly. And just appreciate the conversation. Again, that first round to the second round to this third round, we've made multiple iterations. And so I don't want to make it feel like we're casting dispersions on those first projects or that they're in the penalty box. We didn't have some of the same mechanisms for ensuring that public partnership as part of the application process. So we have that in there now. So that's what you see with the Kellogg Creek project. And what you'll see in this third round is that making sure everything is fully eligible for the program. That's why those first two projects are kind of conditionally awarded. It's clear that's the intent and we're working towards that. So just wanted to be able to mention that. Councilor Wong, to your question about synergy for the region, the current handbook really focuses on projects specifically and looking at those directly. So that's the direction we've given, sort of, we'll give in our review committees and those folks when we come back to you in June 30th, that there's some sort of update or different ways that the council looks when they make their decisions. We can do that, but we really have the current handbook that focuses more on the project specific. And then Councilor Gonzalez just wanted to offer some potential reframing in that timeline you're thinking about with the bond. While the bond has I believe, and Brian Kennedy's not here, could confirm, but a 20 or 30 year payback, it needs to be paid back within that 20 to 30 years.
Right.
The goal is to spend it in 10 to 12 years.
Oh, that's right.
So we will be at that 2031 is like spending it, which means, and we've made a ton of progress on the two programs that the Metro team leads, which is the Protected to Restore Land and Take Care of Metro Projects or Metro Parks. Those programs are set to be completely depleted and spent down by 2031 is the goal. So a conversation about a potential bond renewal, I know that's a big thing to ask or think about, but that conversation might be happening more in the next few years rather than in the next 5 to 10 is what I will be recommending to start thinking about where there's those opportunities also to continue sort of potential renewal rate. So more for later, further conversations, but thank you again. I see our next presenters are here and I will let them take their time. So,
yeah, thanks for
thank you again.
Thanks for the update.
Thank you all.
Okay. CO Communications.
For me today, I know.
Ooh, you rushed yourself off.
Councilor Communications. Any Councilor Communications? No? Okay. Well, so no further discussion. The council meeting is adjourned, and for the record, we did have an executive session this morning from 9 to 10. And our next regular meeting is scheduled for May 21st at 10 a.m. And that meeting will be held